Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hangouts with Visionary Leaders, enlightening and engaging discussions with visionaries, thought leaders, futurists, and change makers that open us up to a new narrative for our future. In this episode, we're going to be discussing this concept of enoughness as a solution for planetary as well as personal well-being with my guest, Jason Weisgerber. I'm your host, Lisa Ingalls. I'm a visionary coach, an author, a speaker, and a consultant. And you can learn more about me and my programs and services over at www.interstatecoaching.com. While you're there, you can pick up my free report on the 5 steps to creating a radical breakthrough in your health, your wealth, and your happiness. So we've reached a new era of human possibility. Individual as well as collective leadership is critical as we navigate our way through old and outdated paradigms that no longer serve us towards moving towards an expanded life and a freer future. Humanity itself, I believe, is on the precipice of a new era of peace, sustainability, health, and prosperity. But the question is, really, will we as a collective choose to commit ourselves to peace and declare an end to struggle and disharmony? Will we as a collective turn the potential for possibility into probability? And if so, how are we going to do this? These are the types of questions that I'm interested in bringing to the table here on this show. We're interested in exploring innovative ideas through engaging discussion that can help us to move through this shift and birth a new humanity. So I would love for you to join us in this conversation. You can post your comments below the video here, and also you'll have some time at the end of our Hangout today to come into the green room, meet and greet with my guest, Jason Weisgerber. This is going to be at the end of the Hangout. I'll be posting that link in our comments section. So what is enoughness? I think that a lot of people answer that question by actually first describing what enoughness is not, what not enoughness is. And maybe it's because there is a growing epidemic of deep-seated feelings of lack and self-doubt and inadequacy amongst us societally. And not enoughness actually shows up in our lives, right? In feelings of being unworthy, inferior, or feeling really depressed. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot more individuals living in a state of not enoughness during this global shift that we're going through. So how do we find our way back to enough, since enough is actually our natural state of being, as my guest would say? And how can enoughness be a sustainable motivator for both personal and planetary well-being? These are the questions that we'll be looking at today with my guest, Jason Weisgerber. And Jason himself has struggled for most of his life with this concept of not enoughness. He knows not enoughness really well. We'll learn a little bit more about his story in just a moment. And as often happens in this journey of awakening that so many of us are on right now, his breakdown led to a breakthrough that became enoughness and that became his mission. Jason Weisgerber is the author of Enoughness, Finding True Fulfillment and Living a Fully Expressed Life, which is a manuscript sharing a personal experience of breakdown to breakthrough that also seeks to promote being motivated in a life, living a life from a state of enoughness rather than not enoughness. Now, Jason has also studied and worked very closely with the founder of Agape International, Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith, and he's also worked as well with top motivational speaker and best-selling author Brendon Burchard. So welcome to the show, Jason. It's awesome to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, well, I mean, we actually just met not too long ago, but we met and it was like instant connection, like, oh, got a brother on the on the journey here. And I was just so excited about your project, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but you do have a project of around enoughness. That I just think is amazing and really is in alignment with what this show is all about, which is really bringing these topics to the table and discussing issues that and concepts that can pull us away and move us towards birthing a new humanity, of moving away from the struggle and disharmony and making those new choices that I talk about always in the beginning of this show. So I'm really excited that you're here.
I love to incite excitement.
Yes, yes. And so, you know, it's, I guess the best place to start with is, you know, how I started when I called you up and I said, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing, but can you tell me a little bit more about your journey? Because your perspective on enoughness really comes from this dark place in your life, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. You know, most of us have gone through these dark times, but can you tell us a little bit more about your journey and how it brought you here into spreading this message of enoughness?
Yes, so that's you know, it's a life story, just like you said, like all of us have. And you know, for me, I've been saying this lately when I talk about enoughness and everything that I'm doing now, and that's what I joke about it, but it's sort of a serious statement that I was born with a crippled self-esteem, is what I say. And you know, that's not necessarily true in the grand scheme of things, but it points to, for me, it points to the state of not enoughness that I'm very familiar with and that I've been talking with so many people about. And so if I go back to my past, the thing that I remember most now that I've been doing a lot of this work and in contemplation and introspection and all the other forms of learning about yourself, you know, reading, therapy, counseling, life coaching, talking with colleagues like yourself that help to bring light to memory. And if I go back, to my past, I say that I started with a crippled self-esteem, but in addition to that, there are things that happen around me, that sort of also feed into that, and sort of team up to support that false ideology in a way. So when I was younger, you know, a few things happened all kind of in the same time period that really, I think, really kind of knocked me down in a deep internal way. And one of those things was that I was attacked at 11 years old at knife point by a strange man in a public park. I was waiting for a soccer practice, and so I'm waiting for this practice to start, and I look behind me, and there's this you know, strange dude. I always say this, I always say, you know, Pigpen from Charlie Brown. You know, Pigpen just walks around with this like constant dust
thing around him, yeah.
And you know, and basically just foggy, funky energy. So this guy had that kind of thing, but I was young. I didn't know any different. So when I turned back around, he jumped me from behind and sat on my chest and put a knife to my throat and said that he would kill me if I made any noise. And I was struggling to get away. And eventually, you know, he pulled my pants down to do some other things. I think it's important to share these things, but you know, right when that happened, I shouted out for some reason that my mother died yesterday, and that stopped him in his tracks right away. He looked up at me and said, just kind of froze for a minute and said, you know, you're a freak, kid, and he ran off. And so that saved my soul that saved my life. That was a life-threatening moment. I mean, looking back as an adult, that's something that could have turned ugly very fast, and for whatever reason that popped out of my mouth and saved me from a lot of other things that could have gone on there. But that was one of the things, I think, and I went home and I told my parents about it, and we called the police, we put a report through, and did all those necessary things to follow through best that we could on what that all meant. But that leaves a sort of impact on an individual's sense of themselves, and as I found out, a sense of personal power is what it's come down to. And then during that same time, I had shared that story with my 4 close friends that I did everything with, played sports with, and went to school with at that age, at 11 years old, and they didn't believe what was happening with me, and that made this. It was almost worse for your friends to not really believe that this kind of thing happened. Again, this is as an adult looking back and processing these events. That was really difficult also on my sense of esteem and sense of personal power. And then they wrote me a letter on, and I write about this in the book on enoughness, but and I will get to a brighter point, but they had then, right after that, had written me a letter on recess saying that they didn't want to be my friend anymore. So I had that attack, and I lost my 4 best friends in an instant. And these are sort of power punches, like I was saying, to a person's esteem and personal power. And not knowing how to process or deal with those kind of things at a young age. On top of that, being human, like I said, being sort of born with this crippled self-esteem, is being human. You're born with this innate sense to want to survive. It's like an animal. It is an animal experience, and it sometimes puts itself ahead of vibrancy or well-being or thriving or self-expression or empowerment. That need to survive. So I had that going on. I had these traumatic events happening at the same time, and other things that in that same period that were also reflecting that sense of disempowerment, and the people around me not really being there to kind of point me in a different direction or remind me of who I am. And those things, along with some other things as I grew older, added to just a growing sense of depression and constant sense of inadequacy and constant sense of lack of power, lack of presence, understanding, confidence, all those things that developed into depression. And so for many years in my early adulthood and into my 30s, I was in a heavy depression, and did a lot of things to be free of that. And most of them were things like meditation and spiritual practice. Was reading a lot of books from spiritual teachers, personal growth teachers, just trying to learn about my human self and the world that I was living in. And what happened was that taught me a lot about life, but not so much about myself. And at one point, like you had said, that breakdown came. Eventually, that depression peaked to a point where I thought the only thing left here was to end it somehow, into my own life or do something. And that seemed very, very inviting, because it was a relief that I was seeking. It was just a sense of, it was, forget about feeling empowered, forget about feeling strength or knowing my talents and my potentials or connecting, with the people in the world around me. I was just trying to get some relief. And I did what I usually do. I was an actor at the time in Los Angeles, and I would go to see movies all the time. That would get me out of my head, basically. And I went to see a doubleheader movie, and I left when I left that second movie. I came out into a park, and I was feeling worse than ever. I mean, I was just exhausted, spent, and just done. And like I said, I was thinking more about taking my life and suicide and those kinds of things. And when I came into that park, it was 2 in the morning, and I just collapsed. I was wasted. I couldn't hold it in anymore, you know. And I fell to the ground, and I just started crying and screaming and weeping and doing you know, just it all came out. It was in a way similar to that moment when I was 11 in that park, when that guy was sitting on my chest with a knife, and I said, my mother died yesterday. That just came out and provided the space I needed to continue. In the same way, when I collapsed in this park, I again experienced this spewing of everything out, and after a few moments, I'm kneeling there on the ground and just catching my breath, you know, after all of that release. And then I felt this incredible, brand new sense of peace and relief. Now, I've looked further into this after this experience, so I'm able to really describe it now because I've really sat with it. But then I had no idea really what was happening. I just was experiencing instantaneous sense of relief. And I looked up, and all around me, the park became completely illuminated. You know, we talk about this now. It's almost like I was sort of having a satori. They say a satori moment, or an enlightened moment, or, you know, you're in complete connection and contact with the universe, the universal intelligence, and that may be true. That, you know, partially yes, there's that in there. But what I say about that now, what that moment was, that pure release was basically a instantaneous removal of the fog of depression and suppression and lack of power, all those kinds of things. Total release of that in a moment. I look up, and of course, the world around me is going to seem crystal clear. You know, that cotton, that heaviness taken off, opened me up, and the trees were. This is 2 a.m. The trees were vibrant. The grass was alive, and in the spiritual world, we might say, basically became fully animated. And I was communicating with the rocks and the trees and the grass, and I was hearing birds around me chirping, and I just felt completely at ease and in communion and full. And in that moment, I felt very blissful. And of course, when you get into bliss, you get in from that state of being, from that disempowerment, to a state of thrill and fullness and vibrancy. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to know what was going on. I was like, what's happening here? Tell me about my power. Am I going to be a success in my life? Can I make a bunch of money? Can I do all the things that I want to do? Why are human beings suffering? All of these kinds of things that came out, and it just kept coming out, and I kept getting the answer back, yes. So whatever I was asking, I would just get this basic response of yes, but it was so nice because it was just, I felt received. It may not have been a specific question or answer, like you're going to get this, or the life is going to be like this and that, but it was a response. I was received, which again felt extremely empowering. And the other message was be still. So yes, and be still. So I'd go back in those moments and kind of, it was like an excited child. I'd want to know everything and talk and blah, 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 you know, do all those things. And then the parent would say, yeah, I totally understand everything. I you know, keep saying it. And then eventually it would say to me, okay, now just be calm for a moment. And I'd sit back and be still and feel all of that spaciousness come back, all of that vibrancy come back, all of that bliss. I went through that cycle a few times that night, and then I went home and went to bed and thought that was cool. You know, woke up the next day saying, now what? Because I still was depressed. My life was just completely unfulfilling and unsatisfying. And subsequently, I went through transitions in some jobs and some relationships and those kinds of things over the next several years, and eventually came back to contemplating that moment and looking into it and revisiting and trying to recall and experience that and see if I could repeat it and see if I could sort of nurture it and expand it. And the way that I did that, I did that was in a meditation. I woke up and I went into a meditation and thought, I'm still frustrated. I'm still depressed, but I had this experience. What if I don't know what I want? That was the thing. I didn't have that clarity to know exactly what I wanted in life. Money or marriage or certain kind of career or recognition or whatever it was. Then what is the feeling tone that I'm searching? That was the question that I asked. What was the feeling, at least, that I wanted to experience on a consistent day-to-day basis? And the word enoughness came up. And so I grabbed onto it and said, okay, enoughness, that's my word. That enoughness is going to be, for better, for worse, whatever, all-encompassing of that experience that I had, which was a complete relief, internal peace and clarity, personal power, and excitement to know what I was capable of. And then I added in eventually I wanted to be able to translate that into the world. I wanted to be able to feel my power and express my power and find it planted in the material world. And that would, through my goals being achieved and reaching that level of material success as well. So slowly was developing enoughness as a feeling for myself, as a state of being for myself. And then I started writing about it. And I wrote about my experiences, a little bit more about my past, and
so in that, as you came through this journey, which was, when was that you had that experience of the breaking down to the ground and crying? And so between 11 years old and then you were how many years had passed before that had happened for you?
About 20 years. That was in my very, very early 30s that breakdown moment in that park came through.
Yeah, the piece that strikes me, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that story, because it's very vulnerable,
Sure.
First and foremost, to share a story like that with everybody
Right.
in a public space, but clearly it's part of your work in the world to do this, because there's a relatability in your story to the stories that each of us have, which is a common collective story of the not-enoughness, whether it's you were held at knife point or something else happened in your life. You were left at the altar, or you were bankrupt, or there's so many versions of this story, to looking at what's going on in third world companies, countries, and what's going on in the Middle East. And this theme pervades, and what strikes me in your speaking into this is something that came for me when you were describing it, is that sense of loss of personal power. Like I don't have any power here. Now it's just been completely taken away, and when that sense of personal power is taken away, of course with it is, the self-esteem and the feeling like I don't have any meaning here. I'm not making a difference with who I am in the world, so why am I even here? I know those types of questions start coming up, and like you said, that is usually seeking relief from all of this. And I think that so many people have all these different strategies. Suicide is a strategy to seeking relief. War is a strategy to seeking relief from it as well.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So the strategies that we use to seek that relief, and anyways, we could go on and on about that. In the contexts in which not enough, whether we're speaking of personal, the emotional, the physical, or if we're speaking of society or planetary, what is enough?
Mm-hmm. Well, you said it in the introduction really well, and enoughness is an ethereal, made-up word. Who knows what it exactly points to. So what I wanted to do was, once I started working into it and writing a book about it and then speaking about it and also continuing to learn how to live with it, I wanted to materialize it. I wanted to make it more concrete. I created for myself a model that I could practice. I had already been working with a lot of spiritual teachers and, like I said, personal growth mentors and reading a lot of books, and I was in deep meditation myself. I was doing transcendental meditation, still am doing meditation every day, but I have developed it's kind of like a hybrid experience that I call a stillness practice that's in my book as well. So I created a model that I call holistic success that comes from enoughness, that includes inner peace, activating potential, which is our power, our sense of power, talent, gifts, creativity, and then outer accomplishment, and then finding ways to sort of create practices and goals in each of those, so that when I'm creating a life, I'm creating a life that includes all of me, and the world around me, and the people around me. And what it came down to me is a sense of that power coming back, wanting to know and express and experience and share my personal human power that I've been given. Mm-hmm. We all go through all these trials and tribulations, but why do we keep going? You know what I mean? That's a funny question. With all the stuff that we go through on a daily basis, like you said, violence, poverty, war, constantly having the media and commercials and advertising tell us that, you know, we need to live a certain way or live at a certain financial income level, or you need this to be a valuable person. We get this constantly. And still, when we go to bed at night, there's a part of us that's like, yeah, there's so much distraction, there's so much not-enoughness messages, but I still want to come through tomorrow and do something great. You know, that's that part of us that's our power, that wants to be known. And for me, when I tapped into my own sense of power, it was blissful and fantastic. At some point, though, I realized that it had to turn into what I call full creative self-expression. So what am I capable of, essentially? And it's interesting, because I spent 8, 9, 10 years developing this for myself, and then unwittingly now into a book and a process and all those things. But it is a process to include all parts, the internal parts of us and the external parts of us. And enoughness, I think, firstly speaks to the part in us that I call our inherent value. So it is there automatically. There is no thing to fight for. It's the thing that people refer to when they talk to me about enoughness, and they go, yes, we're all enough. I am enough. Right. They say it automatically without any...
And it's one of the deepest, I don't know whether you want to call it a wounding or a limiting belief or whatever. I know over all the years in working with clients, one of the only few deepest core limiting beliefs is I'm not enough.
Yeah. Right.
And it surfaces, like you said, in so many different ways, and it's so perpetuated and reinforced by exactly what you were talking about, by media, by unconsciously by our caregivers and our parents and our friends and everybody around us, that it takes. And I'm sure you mentioned you have a lot of practices, which of course I love, the power of practice. I have a whole show on the power of practice as well.
Great, I love it.
It takes practice to be able to see truth regardless of outer appearances, and the truth is, like you're saying, we're enough. Inherently, we're born enough. But understanding that intellectually is very different than knowing it.
Yes.
And being it.
That's so true. I'm glad you're putting it this way, and because, you know, it's funny, now that I've been working with this more and more, when I start talking with people about it, they want to know more, and then they naturally start talking about enoughness, because there's a part of them that knows what that feels like and what that is, and automatically we want to go to that place that says I am enough right away, and then just kind of stop and feel that, and I've realized that it's such a larger process than that.
So much larger. You're so right, and we do want that. It's. I think. Do you think? Well, I think. I'll give you my opinion.
Yeah.
It's human nature to want to go to the good right away and dismiss and be dismissive of, well, you know, there is a part of me that doesn't feel like enough. Oh, well, I know that I am enough because all the books, and I read Abraham Hicks, and I believe in The Secret, and whatever all that stuff is, all good and great, but you still have a process and a journey to go through to truly understand it and become it.
To truly embody it and feel it. I mean, really, you're right. You know, in a way, it's like instant gratification that we all love so much as human beings.
And then that feeds into it's not enough, because when instant gratification doesn't happen, which it never does, then it's never enough. It feeds right into the cycle.
It feeds right into the cycle, which is why I always say, you know, kind of realizing and connecting and knowing that I am enough, or that that inherent value, that inborn value. That's the great realization. Stay with it, and then there's the next step and the next step, and that's what I say is like when that, to me, when I experienced my inherent value in that park in that moment, I felt power, I felt bliss, peace. It also said, hey, dude, what are you capable of now? What are you going to offer? What can you do? And develop that. It took me 10 years to come out of my shell, and I mean, you know, and I'm still coming out. I'll be coming out of that shell for the rest of my days. But there's such reward in realizing my inherent value when I can go into my meditation and realize and sit in that sense that I am enough and feel good about myself independently of circumstances. That's just the beginning. There is a level of, it's funny because I'll say, somebody will go, I am enough, and I'll go, well, at this point I'll say, well, might not be it, because I want to challenge the immediacy of
yes.
So
that's so true. I'm going to pull up a couple of comments that are coming up here. Susan Anderson says, I'm not enough is even an issue in people I work with. Well, yeah, they're all around us, Susan. I agree with that. When they come to the fullness of their visions for who they are in the world, they often say, who am I to do or be this? So I'm guessing, Susan, that you're a coach. And yeah, that is absolutely, I see that as well. I'm going to pull up another one here from Heidi, who says, I think I'm not enough is the core false belief which almost anybody or everybody holds to some degree. It takes practice to transform these beliefs, and nonetheless, this inner voice of not enoughness is always alive. Just won't be able to command us anymore when we have done this shift. So.
Very true. Very true. It's almost, you know, not enough. The state of not enoughness, by the way, has value, has definite value. You know, enoughness doesn't exist without not enoughness, and light doesn't exist without dark, and those things. So that's a good point. You know, not enoughness has its place and its value, because it is a fair. It is fair to say that it's a motivator of humankind. If you look at the industrial era, you know, we pumped some serious stuff out in the last couple hundred years in terms of, you know, being able to build skyscrapers and airplanes and create this incredible civilization for ourselves. There is a level at some point, I feel, and that probably is happening right now, where human beings want to realize, I want to reap the fruits of my labor. I want to enjoy this security that I've set up around me. Yet we've been pushing the button of solving the insecurity for so long that now it's, you know, like these two guests that you just read are saying, that it's sort of not enoughness is sort of like ingrained in us, and it is, and it has value. And like your second guest was saying, it's tilting towards knowing more about enoughness, and that's my place.
Yes.
I want to just have conversations about enoughness. You know, my website, enoughness.com, is 60 different guests talking about enoughness. Nobody's an expert on it. We're talking about it. So that enoughness to me becomes the place where I'm motivated from, rather than being motivated from not enoughness. I'm motivated more from a sense of enoughness, which is, let me digress for just a second. In my book, I just wrote down some other words that are the same as saying not enough. So I was like, well, how do I describe what enoughness is? Like you said in the beginning, well, it's actually easier sometimes to describe what it is by describing what it isn't. Mm-hmm. And so here's some other terms, words that mean the same thing as not enough. This is from the dictionary. Inadequate, incomplete, lacking, unequal, weak, impotent, powerless, incapable, defective, dissatisfactory. So those are feelings of not enough. Now, on the flip side, some synonyms for enough are abundant, reached, attained, perfective, arrived, satisfied, ample, full, bountiful, sufficient, capable, potent. So I'm seeking to bring enoughness into our awareness more often, because not enoughness is there. It's good to go. We understand, and it can be a decent sense of place to be motivated from. This sense of enoughness is another awesome place to be motivated from, coming from a sense of feeling arrived, feeling satisfied, feeling ample, feeling potent, feeling capable. That's a great driver as well.
And maybe there's a point at which, just as a possibility, that maybe it doesn't matter where you start that journey, and maybe your journey does start from being motivated by not enoughness, and then allowing that experience and that motivation to then shift to the enoughness side, because as we're already saying here, they're two sides of the same coin. To know one, you have to know the other, and at some point maybe in the journey that there's a shift in that, and I think that's what you're speaking into.
That's exactly right. So, I thank you, by the way, for having the show and inviting me and connecting with me, and I hope we'll continue to be in connection for quite a while. And by the way, Lisa is one of the guests on the enoughness sessions, so which is great. But yeah, in the last 20 or 30 minutes, I've been talking a lot about some of my history and then some ideas on enoughness. But really, what I want to do is just be that receptivity that I felt in that park that night to other people that are feeling this overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction in their lives, about their lives, and about themselves. Understand that and and hold a space for that. Say, I get you. We get you. We're together on this. Now, there is this experience of enoughness also, and here's a little bit about it. Here's a little bit about what the feeling is, and don't rush into it, because it's interesting that if somebody, when I would rush into wanting to experience enoughness on a daily basis, and I couldn't hold that space for very long, I'd feel even worse. So I'd feel even more inadequate. When I was in that park and I had that breakthrough experience, it was automatic. It was given to me. It was done for me. And I could hold that bliss in that great space for about 90 seconds before I'd want to jump into my head and ask questions and want to know more. And it was about wanting to be in a state of doing rather than enjoying the state of being, and learning that it's possible to live from a state of being rather than always in a state of doing. So I want to talk to people. I know you're going to open it up for more comments and questions and everything too, but that's my role, is to be able to talk to people and receive.
Yeah, I love it. And you've gone so deeply into this one concept of enoughness that maybe at first thought, it'd be enoughness, but it's such a deep and expansive body of work to dive into.
Yeah.
And I love how you've put together, you guys, just so that you know, what Jason is putting together this really cool thing where it's 60 people speaking into the concept of enoughness for just 60 seconds. And it's fascinating. I thought it was an amazing project that he's putting together. And again, you can find that at the enoughness.sessions.com and find out more about that and how you can stay in touch with Jason. And as we're wrapping it up here in the next few minutes, I do want to let you know we're opening up the green room off air. So if you do have questions and want to talk a little bit more to Jason for the last 15 minutes of this hour, you're going to be invited to come into the green room as well. So be on the lookout for that link coming up really soon. But as we're closing up, Jason, I just want to pull this all together because this is Hangouts with Visionary Leaders, and part of the purpose of this show is to bring in a concept and idea, and we know that be like, Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world, that as we heal and we become enough, it becomes a collective healing and global healing. And I don't know if you have in a minute or two could speak into, because that is part of what you say your mission is to bring this in a bigger way for planetary and global healing. Exactly,
because again, it's an appropriate and it's a state of being to be motivated from that has just as much value as any other state of being. So you're right. Ultimately it's a complete lifestyle change for an individual is to live a life from the state
So you just froze and then went off, and so I'm going to have you repeat all of that all over again, Jason.
Okay, so I was just saying that enoughness is a lifestyle change. So it's at the individual from that state of being is a lifestyle thing for the individual, but it also I hope that it will also grow globally as well, so that more and more people are remembering that they want to live from a certain state of being with enoughness, and live from there. So, yes, global, personal, all of it.
Wonderful. And just again to give you guys a little where you can meet Jason and connect with him, it's at the enoughness.sessions.com.
Without the, so just enoughness.sessions.com.
Oh, right, enoughness.sessions.com. We'll put that in the comments as well. And so we're going to be putting that link into the comments below. Come join us in the green room in just a minute here. And I want to say thank you so much to Jason for this important discussion. It just is so critical, and I think you're bringing some amazing teachings into the world, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate being on the show. And you're right, there's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to be doing it for a while. And on the Enoughness Sessions website, when you sign in, I will send you when it's complete, all the 60-minute compilation, and you can also have a conversation with me for 20 minutes when you sign in and give me your name. So we'll connect that way too.
Perfect.
All right.
Wonderful. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Hangouts with Visionary Leaders. I just put the link to join Jason and I in the green room for a 15-minute chat. If you'd like to join us in there, we'll be just hanging out. Come meet us. All right, everybody. We'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.